The marble floor of Meridian Trust felt cold beneath my worn sneakers as I approached Helena's corner office. Through the glass walls, I could see her perfectly manicured fingers hovering over her keyboard, probably executing another transaction she believed would ruin me. She hadn't noticed me yet, hadn't seen the security badge hanging from my neck, hadn't read the name embossed in gold letters. 23 years of marriage, and she never once asked who really signed her paychecks. The irony tasted bitter in my mouth as I knocked on her door, watching her confident smile dissolve the moment she looked up, and saw not the broken man she'd left behind, but the owner of everything she thought she controlled. My name is Vincent Castellano, and 3 days ago my ex-wife tried to destroy me with a phone call. I was standing in the produce section at Grayson's Market, holding a bag of overpriced organic apples, the kind Helena used to insist we needed for our health-conscious lifestyle, when my credit card got declined. The college kid behind the register looked at me with that particular blend of pity and embarrassment that retail workers perfect over time. "Sorry, sir. It says insufficient funds. Do you have another card?" The elderly woman behind me shifted impatiently, her cart loaded with cat food and frozen dinners. I reached for my wallet, pulling out the backup Visa. Declined. The MasterCard. Declined. Even the small community bank card I'd kept since my 20s declined. "Must be some kind of system error," I muttered, though the knot in my stomach told me otherwise. The kid nodded sympathetically, probably thinking I was another senior citizen whose kids had forgotten to help with the bills. I walked out empty-handed, leaving the apples on the conveyor belt. My phone buzzed as I sat in my truck in the parking lot, a text from an unknown number. "Hope you enjoyed your little shopping trip. H. Helena." Of course. I'd underestimated her. Vindictiveness, and that was my first mistake. When she'd served me divorce papers 6 months ago, claiming I was emotionally unavailable and financially controlling, I'd let her have the house, the cars, even the vacation home in Colorado. I thought generosity might soften the blow for our kids, Marcus and Sophie, both grown and building their own lives, caught in the middle of their parents' collapse. What I hadn't anticipated was Helena's talent for strategic cruelty. I drove home to my modest rental on Elm Street, a 2-bedroom house that smelled faintly of the previous tenant's cigarettes, despite 3 months of air fresheners. The contrast to our former 4,000-square-foot colonial wasn't lost on me, but I'd chosen simplicity over fighting. Some battles aren't worth the cost. The landline was ringing when I walked in. I'd kept it mainly for emergencies, since cell service was spotty in this older neighborhood. "Mr. Castellano, this is Jennifer from First National Bank's Fraud Department. We're calling about some unusual activity on your accounts." "What kind of activity?" "Well, sir, it appears someone with authorized access has initiated a freeze on all your credit lines and checking accounts. The request came through this morning with proper verification codes." My hand tightened on the receiver. "Authorized access?" "Yes, sir, Mrs. Helena Castellano. She's listed as your emergency contact and has power of attorney for financial decisions in case of—" "She doesn't have power of attorney." The words came out sharper than I intended. "Sir, I'm showing documentation filed 3 weeks ago. It's all properly notarized and—" I hung up. Helena had forged my signature, or manipulated me into signing something I hadn't read carefully. Either way, she'd effectively cut off my access to every account I'd spent 40 years building. I made coffee with hands that shook slightly, not from fear, but from a deep, simmering rage I hadn't felt since my father died, and left me to navigate the world alone at 17. Helena had always been clever, but this was calculated destruction disguised as financial protection. My reflection in the kitchen window showed a tired man in a faded flannel shirt, grey stubble covering a face that looked older than its 62 years. Helena used to say I had kind eyes, back when kindness mattered to her. Now those same eyes stared back at me with something harder. I pulled out my laptop and began making calls. The first was to Marcus, my oldest. He answered on the 4th ring, sounding distracted. "Dad, is everything okay? Your mother froze my bank accounts." Silence. Then, "What do you mean froze them?" "I can't access my own money. She somehow got power of attorney and convinced the banks I'm incapacitated or something." "That can't be legal." "Probably not, but proving it will take time I don't have. Marcus sighed. Dad, look, I know this divorce has been hard on everyone, but maybe Mom's just she's trying to force me into poverty, son. Make me look like the financial failure she's been telling everyone I am. Another pause. I'll call her. Don't. The firmness in my voice surprised us both. This is between me and your mother. After I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table and opened my laptop. The screen cast a blue glow across a room that felt smaller and shabbier than usual. Outside, my neighbor's dog was barking at shadows, a rhythmic sound that matched the pulsing anger in my chest. I typed Meridian Trust Bank into the search bar. Helena worked there as a senior loan officer, had for 8 years, ever since Sophie started high school, and she'd decided to return to banking. She'd climbed the ladder quickly, impressing her supervisors with her attention to detail and client relations. She'd mentioned her boss, some executive named Richard Bryce, countless times over dinner. What Helena had never mentioned, what she'd somehow never thought to ask, about in 23 years of marriage, was why I'd encouraged her to apply there in the first place. I scrolled through the bank's leadership page until I found Richard Bryce's photo, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and a nervous smile. Below his bio was the typical corporate hierarchy: CEO, president, board of directors. My name wasn't listed anywhere public. It never had been. I closed the laptop and walked to the small safe I'd had installed behind my bedroom closet. Inside, beneath my birth certificate and military discharge papers, was a thin folder I hadn't opened in years. The documents were yellowed but still legally binding: incorporation papers for Castellano Holdings, LLC, stock certificates, trust agreements, and at the bottom, a single sheet that outlined my controlling interest in 17 businesses across 3 states, including Meridian Trust Bank. I'd bought it 12 years ago when it was struggling, using money Helena never knew I had. Inheritance from my grandfather's steel business, investments I'd made quietly over decades. She'd seen the comfortable life, the steady income from my consulting work, but had never asked where it really came from. Tomorrow, I would walk into that bank and remind my ex-wife that some games have consequences she never saw coming. But tonight, I poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon and wondered how a woman who'd shared my bed for over 2 decades could know so little about the man lying next to her. The answer, I realized, was going to change everything. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table until dawn, surrounded by documents I hadn't touched in years. Bank statements from accounts Helena didn't know existed, investment portfolios managed by firms in other cities, property deeds for buildings she'd driven past 1,000 times without knowing I owned them. The irony wasn't lost on me. She'd married a man she thought was modest, reliable, financially adequate. The kind of husband who worried about grocery bills and clipped coupons from the Sunday paper. And I'd let her believe it, because it seemed easier than explaining money I'd inherited from a grandfather she'd never met, or investments that had grown beyond anything I'd ever expected. My grandfather, Salvatore Castellano, had been a different kind of man. Built bridges and buildings with steel and sweat, then taught himself to read financial statements by lamplight after 14-hour days. When he died, he left me more than money. He left me the understanding that wealth should be invisible, that power exercised quietly lasted longer than power displayed. Helena would have called it deception. I'd called it protection. The morning sun was filtering through my kitchen blinds when I finally showered and put on my only decent suit, navy blue, bought for Sophie's college graduation 3 years ago. In the mirror, I looked like what I'd always been, a working man dressed up for a special occasion. The disguise had served me well. I drove to Meridian Trust at 9:30, early enough to catch Helena before her lunch meetings, but late enough that the morning rush would be over. The building was downtown, 15 stories of glass and steel that dominated the city's modest skyline. I'd admired its architecture when I'd bought it, the way it managed to look both substantial and approachable. The parking garage was nearly empty. I found a spot near the elevator and sat for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel. Part of me wanted to drive away, to handle this through lawyers and intermediaries like I usually did. But Helena had made this personal when she'd tried to humiliate me in that grocery store. The elevator ride to the 12th floor gave me time to remember the last conversation Helena and I had shared. It was in our lawyer's office, her sitting across a mahogany table that probably cost more than most people's cars, wearing the pearl earrings I'd given her for our 20th anniversary. "You never understood ambition, Vincent," she'd said, her voice carrying that particular tone she used when explaining things to people she considered beneath her comprehension. "I need more than this small-town, small-dreams existence." I'd nodded and signed whatever papers her attorney pushed across the table, because fighting would have required revealing exactly how big my dreams had actually been. The elevator doors opened onto the executive floor. Meridian Trust's 12th floor was all understated elegance, cream-colored carpets, abstract paintings that didn't offend anyone, and enough natural light to make the space feel open, despite the labyrinth of offices. The receptionist was a young woman with auburn hair and nervous energy. Her nameplate read Angela Morrison. "Good morning," I said. "I'm here to see Helena Castellano." "Do you have an appointment, Mr. Castellano?" "Vincent Castellano. I'm her husband." The word still felt strange. Ex-husband required. Too much explanation. Angela's eyes widened slightly. She'd probably heard office gossip about Helena's divorce, the way these things spread through workplaces like spilled coffee. I'll call her office." While Angela made the call, I studied the corporate photographs lining the hallway. Generic shots of handshakes and ribbon cuttings, the kind of images that filled annual reports. In one corner, almost hidden behind a potted plant, was a smaller frame containing the bank's original incorporation documents from 1987. I'd read those documents 100 times when I was considering the purchase. Meridian Trust had been a family business then, started by the Grayson family, the same Graysons who now ran the overpriced grocery store where Helena had humiliated me yesterday. The irony of buying their bank hadn't escaped me. "Mr. Castellano?" Angela had hung up the phone. "Mrs. Castellano is in a meeting, but she can see you in about 15 minutes. Would you like to wait in the conference room?" "I'll wait here." The 15 minutes stretched into 25. A power play, probably. Helena had always believed that making people wait demonstrated importance. I used the time to observe the staff, the way junior executives hurried past with folders, the casual confidence of people who worked with other people's money but had never struggled to make their own. When Helena finally appeared, she looked exactly as I'd expected. Professionally polished in a charcoal grey suit, her blonde hair pulled back in a style that suggested competence without warmth. She'd lost weight since I'd last seen her, and her makeup was applied with the precision of someone who understood that appearance was a business tool. "Vincent." Her voice was carefully neutral. "This is unexpected. I tried calling. Seems my phone service was disconnected along with everything else." A slight tightening around her eyes was the only indication she'd heard me. "Perhaps we should talk in my office." Helena's office was corner-situated with windows facing both downtown and the river. The furniture was expensive, but not ostentatious, exactly the kind of controlled luxury that impressed clients without triggering suspicion from regulators. On her desk, beside a computer monitor and neat stacks of loan applications, was a framed photo of our children from Sophie's high school graduation. She didn't invite me to sit. "I assume you're here about the account freezes," she said, moving behind her desk like a general claiming high ground. "Among other things, Vincent, I understand you're upset, but I had to protect our assets during the divorce proceedings. There are procedures." "Our assets?" I kept my voice level. "Last I checked, you got the house, the cars, and half the retirement accounts. These were my personal checking and credit accounts." Helena's jaw tightened. "Your personal accounts that you've been using to hide money from the divorce settlement. Did you think I wouldn't notice? Hide money? Please, I'm not stupid. The mysterious consulting fees, the investment returns that never quite added up to any actual work I could see you doing. You've been playing financial games for years." She was right, of course, just not in the way she thought. "So you decided to freeze accounts that have my name on them, my social security number, my credit history going back 40 years. I decided to ensure that any hidden assets would be properly disclosed during the divorce proceedings. It's called due diligence." Helena sat down, a gesture that made her seem smaller but more entrenched. Behind her, through the window, I could see construction workers on a building site across the street. Real work, the kind I understood. And if those accounts were my only access to money for food, rent, utilities, you should have thought of that before you started hiding assets. The casual cruelty in her tone was what decided me. Not anger, exactly, but a cold clarity about who I'd been married to for 23 years. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a single business card, plain white stock with raised black letters. I placed it on her desk between us. Helena glanced at it, then looked again more carefully. Her expression shifted from confident irritation to confusion. "I don't understand," she said. But she was beginning to. The business card lay between us like a small white bridge spanning 23 years of assumptions. Helena picked it up with the kind of careful precision she usually reserved for loan documents. Her eyes moved across the raised letters. Vincent S. Castellano, principal owner, Castellano Holdings, LLC. Below that, in smaller font, primary investment, Meridian Trust Bank. The silence stretched long enough for me to hear the heating system cycling on, the distant murmur of voices from the hallway, the almost inaudible tick of the wall clock behind her desk. This is some kind of joke, but her voice lacked conviction. I didn't respond. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let someone's own intelligence work against their assumptions. Helena set the card down and turned to her computer, her manicured fingers moving across the keyboard with the quick efficiency of someone who'd spent years navigating financial databases. I knew what she was looking for. Corporate ownership records, SEC filings, anything that would prove the card was elaborate fiction. I watched her face as she found what she was looking for. The screen reflected in her eyes, and I could see the exact moment when disbelief became recognition, became something approaching fear. "You own this bank." Not a question. "Controlling interest, 68% as of last month." Her hands had stopped moving on the keyboard. "That's impossible. You're a consultant. You drive a 10-year-old truck. You shop at discount stores." "I am a consultant. I do drive an old truck, and I shop where things cost less than they should." I moved closer to her desk, not threatening, just closing the distance conversation required. "Those things don't contradict owning businesses." "How long?" "I bought Meridian 12 years ago. Been expanding the portfolio since." Helena's face was cycling through emotions too quickly for any single one to settle. "The grocery store. Yesterday. You knew. Grayson's Market is part of a small retail chain I acquired last year. The Grayson family kept the original store in the deal, but they lease the building from me now." I paused. "The kid who couldn't process your card freeze. He's working 2 jobs to pay for community college, makes $14 an hour." "You're lying." "I'm a lot of things, Helena, but I've never lied to you." She stood up abruptly, the motion sharp enough to send her coffee cup rattling against its saucer. "Never lied? You've been lying about everything. Our entire marriage was a lie. I've been private about money. That's different from lying." "Private?" Her voice was rising, and I could see other employees glancing toward her office through the glass walls. "You let me think we were middle class. You let me work here for 8 years without telling me you owned the place where I work. You never asked what. Honey, do you secretly own my workplace? That's not a normal conversation. You asked me about my consulting work exactly once in 1998. I started to explain about investment management and property acquisition, and you said it sounded boring and changed the subject." Helena's mouth opened, then closed. She was remembering, I could see it. "You wanted to believe I was simple," I continued. "Safe. The kind of husband who wouldn't challenge your need to be the ambitious one, the successful one. You loved having the more impressive job title at dinner parties. That's not—" She sat back down heavily. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I learned early that money changes how people see you. My grandfather taught me that. He said wealth should be like good tailoring, present but invisible until you need it. Your grandfather was a steel worker. My grandfather owned 3 steel fabrication companies by the time he died. The worker part was where he started, not where he finished." Helena was staring at the business card again, as if the letters might rearrange themselves into something that made more sense. "The house. You let me have the house. If you're so Wealthy, why didn't you fight for it? Because I didn't need it. I own 43 rental properties across the state. The house was just where we lived. 43. She repeated the number like she was trying to taste its reality. Real estate is a steady investment. People always need places to live. The vacation home in Colorado? I kept that one. You signed papers transferring ownership to me, but you never read what you were signing. Helena's face went pale. The mortgage. Payments. There is no mortgage. I bought it outright in 2003. She leaned back in her chair, and for the first time since I'd walked into her office, she looked like the woman I'd been married to instead of the banking executive she'd become. Vulnerable. Off balance. I don't understand any of this. If you have all this money, why live like we lived? How did we live? Carefully. Budgets and coupons and discussions about whether we could afford Sophie's college tuition. Sophie's tuition was never in question. The education fund was fully funded before she started kindergarten. Same with Marcus. Then why? Because I wanted our children to understand the value of money, to work for what they wanted, to not assume wealth was automatic or permanent. Helena's phone buzzed with a text message, but she ignored it. Outside her window, the construction workers were taking their lunch break, sitting on concrete barriers with brown bag lunches and thermos bottles of coffee. The credit cards, she said quietly. The account freezes. Power of attorney documents you filed 3 weeks ago. Very thorough forgeries. I didn't forge anything. A lawyer. You had a lawyer who helped you manipulate legal documents to suggest I was mentally incompetent and needed financial protection. The lawyer's name was David Hutchinson, and he owes $200,000 in business loans to this bank. Loans that come up for review next month. Helena's eyes widened. You're threatening. I'm explaining cause and effect. You tried to use my money against me. Mr. Hutchinson helped you do something that was, at minimum, questionable legal practice. Now he has to hope the man he helped defraud is feeling generous when his loan payments come due. You can't do that. I can do exactly that, but I probably won't, because destroying people isn't profitable. It's just wasteful. She was quiet for a long moment, processing. Then, what do you want? Call First National Bank and reverse the account freezes. I want you to explain to them that there was a misunderstanding about my mental competency and that all financial restrictions should be lifted immediately. And if I don't... I pulled my phone from my pocket and showed her the screen. I have Richard Bryce's direct number programmed in here. Your boss, my employee. One call, and this conversation becomes a performance review. Helena looked at the phone, then at me, then at the framed photo of our children on her desk. You're not the man I married. I'm exactly the man you married. You just never bothered to find out who that was. She reached for her desk phone, her hand trembling slightly. This doesn't change anything between us. No, I agreed. It doesn't. But as Helena began dialing First National Bank, I realized that wasn't entirely true. Something had changed, not between us, but inside me. For the first time in 40 years, I was tired of being invisible, and that was going to complicate everything. Helena made the call. I sat in the chair across from her desk, expensive leather that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and listened to her explain to First National Bank that there had been a misunderstanding about my mental capacity. Her voice was steady, professional, the same tone she'd probably used thousands of times to discuss loan approvals and interest rates. Yes, I understand the documentation will need to be corrected. No, Mr. Castellano is fully competent to manage his financial affairs. I apologize for any inconvenience this may have caused. When she hung up, the silence felt different than before. Heavier, like the air pressure had changed. It's done, she said. Thank you. Helena was studying my face as if seeing me for the first time. The children don't know, do they? About the money. They know I'm comfortable. They don't know specifics. Marcus called me last night, after you talked to him. He was worried about you, she paused. He said you sounded broken. The word hit harder than I'd expected. Maybe I was. You could have told him the truth. Could have told both of them. And what would that accomplish? Marcus is building his own career as a software engineer. Sophie's starting medical school next year. They're learning to be independent, to solve their own problems. Knowing their father is wealthy would just complicate that. Helena picked up a pen from her desk, rolled it between her fingers. Or it might have made them feel more secure. Security isn't something you can give someone else. It's something you build for yourself. Is that what your grandfather taught you? Among other things. She set the pen down. I hated him, you know. Your grandfather. He was at our wedding and he looked at me like I wasn't good enough for you. He was protective. He was arrogant, old-world Italian machismo. He was right about you, though. The words came out before I could stop them, sharper than I'd intended. Helena's face flushed, but she didn't look away. Right about what? He said you'd never be satisfied with enough, that you'd always need more status, more recognition, more proof that you mattered. He said that kind of hunger would eventually consume everything around it. Your grandfather was a bitter old man who died alone. He died in his sleep, surrounded by 3 generations of family. And he was worth more than this entire bank when he passed. Helena's phone buzzed again. This time she glanced at it and her expression changed. It's Sophie, she said. Answer it. Helena swiped the screen. Hi, sweetheart. What? Slow down. When did this happen? I could hear Sophie's voice through the speaker, rapid and agitated, but couldn't make out words. Helena's face was growing increasingly concerned. Okay, we'll figure this out. Don't do anything until we talk to you. No, don't withdraw from the program. Sophie, listen to me. This is fixable. She ended the call and looked at me with something approaching panic. Medical school, she said. Sophie's financial aid was revoked. Something about discrepancies in our divorce paperwork, questions about hidden assets. They're saying she may have committed fraud on her aid applications. The coffee in my stomach turned to acid. What kind of discrepancies? The power of attorney filings triggered automatic reviews. When the banks reported the account freezes, it flagged inconsistencies in our reported income versus our actual assets. The Financial Aid Office is investigating whether Sophie knowingly misrepresented our family's financial situation. I stood up, moved to the window. The construction workers across the street were back from lunch, pouring concrete for what looked like a foundation. Steady work. Predictable problems with predictable solutions. She could lose her admission, Helena continued. They're talking about a full investigation. If they determine she committed financial aid fraud, she didn't know about the money, neither of you did. That doesn't matter. She signed the applications. She certified that all information was true and complete. My phone was ringing. Marcus. Dad? What the hell is going on? Sophie just called me crying about medical school and fraud investigations and something about you owning banks. Where are you right now? I'm at work, but I can leave. Dad, she's talking about dropping out of school. Entirely. She thinks she's going to prison. She's not going to prison, and she's not dropping out of school. Then what? Meet me at the house in an hour, your mother's house. Bring Sophie. Dad, Marcus, 1 hour. I hung up and turned back to Helena. She was sitting very still, hands folded in her lap like a schoolchild waiting for punishment. This is what you wanted, isn't it? I said. When you froze those accounts, you wanted to force disclosure of assets. I wanted to understand what you'd been hiding. Now you understand, and our daughter is paying the price. Helena's voice was small. I didn't think about Sophie's financial aid. You didn't think about anything except proving you were right about me. I walked toward her door, then stopped. There's something else you should know. What? The house you're living in. The one I let you have in the divorce. What about it? I bought it from the bank in 1987, 3 years before we got married. Paid cash. Your name was added to the deed when we married, but it was never community property. Helena's face went white. That's impossible. The mortgage you've been paying for 6 months, that's a loan against property I own, secured by a deed of trust that expires next month. You're lying. Check the county records. The original purchase is public information. I opened her office door, then paused. One more thing. The lawyer who helped you file those power of attorney documents? David Hutchinson. His business loan comes due for review next Thursday, $200,000 at 8% interest. The payment history shows he's been late 6 times in the past year. Helena stood up. Vincent, I'll see you at the house in an hour. We're going to fix this mess you created, and then we're going to have a conversation about what happens next. I walked out of her office and past the reception desk, where Angela Morrison was trying very hard to look like she hadn't been listening to every word. In the elevator, I caught my reflection in the polished steel doors, still the same tired man in the same old suit, but something fundamental had shifted. For 40 years, I'd been the invisible rich man, the secret owner, the hidden benefactor. I'd built wealth quietly and used it carefully, always from the shadows, but Helena had dragged me into the light, and now my children were paying for her curiosity, which meant it was time to stop being invisible entirely. The house looked smaller than I remembered. I sat in my truck outside 412 Maple Street for 5 minutes before going in, studying the place Helena and I had called home for 18 years. The Colonial's white paint was still pristine, the landscaping still professionally maintained, but something about it felt diminished. Maybe it was seeing it through the lens of ownership rather than partnership. Helena's Mercedes was in the driveway, along with Marcus's Honda Civic and Sophie's battered Subaru, the one she'd insisted on buying herself with money from her part-time job at the campus bookstore. The car that had made me proud of her independence and Helena frustrated by her stubbornness. I used my key. Technically, I still had the right. Helena was in the kitchen, making coffee with the kind of mechanical precision that meant she was barely holding herself together. She'd changed out of her business suit into jeans and a sweater, the casual clothes that made her look more like the woman I'd married and less like the banking executive who'd tried to destroy me. "They're in the living room," she said without looking up. "Sophie's been crying since she got here." The living room felt like a museum of our marriage. Family photos on the mantelpiece, furniture we'd chosen together during weekend trips to antiquing towns. The piano Sophie had played until she was 16 and decided she preferred science to music. Sophie was curled up in the corner of the sofa, knees drawn to her chest, looking younger than her 22 years. Marcus sat beside her, one protective arm around her shoulders. When they looked up at me, I saw fear in Sophie's eyes and confusion in Marcus's. "Dad?" Sophie's voice was thick with tears. "They're saying I committed fraud, that I could go to jail." I sat down in the chair across from them, the recliner Helena had always claimed was ugly but had never actually tried to replace. "Tell me exactly what happened." "The financial aid office called this morning," Marcus said. "They said there were discrepancies in Sophie's FAFSA applications, something about Mom's power of attorney filings triggering reviews of our family's assets. They found out about money we didn't know existed," Sophie added. "Money that should have been reported on my applications for the past 4 years. I nodded. "How much aid did you receive?" "About $30,000 a year. Grants and low-interest loans." Sophie wiped her eyes with a tissue that was already damp. "Dad, if they make me pay it all back, if they file criminal charges, they won't. How can you be sure?" Helena appeared in the doorway, coffee mug in hand, and I realized this was the first time in months that our entire family had been in the same room. "Because," I said, "your father is going to make some phone calls." Marcus frowned. "What kind of calls?" I looked at Helena. She gave a small nod, not forgiveness, but permission. "Kids, there are some things about our family's financial situation that you don't know, things I should have told you a long time ago." "What kind of things?" Sophie sat up straighter. "I'm not just a consultant. I own businesses, a lot of businesses." The silence that followed was different from the one in Helena's office. This was my children processing information that challenged everything they'd believed about their father. "What kind of businesses?" Marcus asked. "Real estate, some retail." "The bank where your mother works?" Sophie looked back and forth between Helena and me. "You own Mom's bank?" "I own controlling interest in Meridian Trust, yes." Marcus leaned forward. "Dad, are you rich?" The question hung in the air like smoke. I thought about my grandfather, about the conversations we'd had when I was Marcus's age, about the weight of money and the responsibility it carried. "I'm wealthy enough that Sophie's education was never in question, wealthy enough that neither of you will need to worry about student loans or medical bills or buying your first homes." Sophie's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my God." "But also wealthy enough to understand that money changes people, changes how they see themselves and how others see them. I wanted you both to learn independence first, to build your own confidence and capabilities. So you let us struggle? Marcus's voice carried an edge I'd never heard before. Sophie's been working 20 hours a week while taking pre-med classes. I've been living on ramen noodles and generic cereal. You've been learning that you're capable of taking care of yourselves. We've been learning that our father doesn't trust us. The accusation hit like a physical blow. Helena was watching from the doorway, her expression unreadable. Marcus, I said carefully, I was trying to protect you. From what? From knowing we had options? From understanding that failure wasn't catastrophic because there was a safety net. Sophie was crying again, but differently now. All those nights I stayed up worried about tuition payments, about whether I could afford medical school. I know. No, you don't. She stood up, pacing to the window. You don't know what it's like to go to bed every night calculating costs, wondering if you're smart enough or working hard enough to justify the expense. Sophie, I wrote essays about financial hardship, Dad. For scholarship applications, I wrote about my family's struggles, about how I understood the value of education, because I'd seen my parents sacrifice for it. The room felt too small, too warm. Outside, the neighbors were raking leaves in their yard, the kind of ordinary Saturday afternoon activity that seemed impossibly distant. I never asked you to sacrifice, I said. You never gave us the choice not to. Helena stepped into the room. This is what I meant about trust, she said quietly. This is what I was trying to understand when I froze those accounts. You were trying to prove I was hiding something. I was trying to understand why the man I'd been married to for 23 years felt like a stranger. Marcus was shaking his head. Unbelievable. You two have been fighting about money Dad was hiding, and we're the ones who end up in trouble. I pulled out my phone. Sophie, what's the name of the financial aid director at your school? Dr. Patricia Williams. But Dad. And the number for the financial aid office. Sophie recited the number from memory. I dialed. Dr. Williams? This is Vincent Castellano, Sophie Castellano's father. Yes, I understand there's been some confusion about our family's financial situation. That's correct. There were some asset disclosures that weren't properly reported. No, Dr. Williams, my daughter had no knowledge of these assets. The conversation lasted 15 minutes. I explained the separation, the power of attorney situation, the fact that Sophie had filled out her financial aid applications based on information we'd provided. I also explained that we would be immediately repaying all need-based aid she'd received with interest. She wants to speak with you, I told Sophie, handing her the phone. Sophie's side of the conversation was mostly, yes, ma'am, and I understand. When she hung up, she looked dazed. They're dropping the investigation. Dr. Williams said circumstances beyond my control created the discrepancy, and since we're making full restitution, she looked at me. Dad, that's $120,000. It's handled. Just like that? Just like that. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then, what happens now? Now you both finish school without worrying about money. Sophie goes to medical school and becomes the doctor she's meant to be. Marcus continues building software and changes the world one program at a time. And you stop hiding, Sophie said. And I stop hiding. Helena was leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed. The house. You said you owned it before we were married. I did. So the mortgage I've been paying goes into an escrow account. The house is yours, Helena. It always was, in every way that mattered. Even after everything? I looked around the room, at the photos of family vacations, at the growth marks penciled on the kitchen doorframe, at the chip in the coffee table, from when Marcus had learned to ride his bike indoors during a rainstorm. Even after everything. The afternoon sun was slanting through the windows, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors. In 6 months, this house would be full of memories but empty of our daily presence. Sophie would be in medical school. Marcus would be starting a new job in Seattle. Helena would be building a life I wasn't part of. But for this moment, we were still a family figuring out how to be honest with each other. There's one more thing, I said. Christmas is in 8 weeks. I'd like us to spend it together. All of us. Sophie looked at Helena, then at Marcus. Here in this house, one last Christmas as the family we were before we became the family we are now. Helena's eyes were bright with tears she wasn't letting fall. Vincent, I know it doesn't fix anything, but some endings deserve better than lawyers and frozen bank accounts. Outside, the neighbors had finished with their leaves and gone inside. The street was quiet except for the sound of children playing somewhere in the distance. Life going on, the way it always did. Marcus reached over and took Sophie's hand. I think that sounds good, he said. Sophie nodded. Me too. Helena was quiet for a long moment. Then, I'll make the turkey, if you bring that stuffing recipe your grandfather taught you. I can do that. And just like that, we had a plan. Not a reconciliation, not a solution to 23 years of misunderstanding, but a plan. Sometimes, I realized, that's enough to build on. As I drove home to my small rental house, I thought about an invisibility, about the weight of secrets and the price of revelation. In the rearview mirror, the house on Maple Street grew smaller until it disappeared entirely. But for the first time in months, I wasn't the one hiding.